The gate of my own city did not know me. I stood in its shadow with snow crusting my hood, and the two spearmen at the low gate looked through me the way men look through a beggar, not with cruelty, only with the blank ease of people who have decided you are not a person. I had commanded 10,000 at the Sarn Pass. I had held the north when the passes ran red. And now a boy of 19 with frost in his beard leaned on his spear and told me the king's city fed no strangers after the bell, and to try the almshouse across the river if I still had legs to walk. I had legs. I had a false name, a wayfarer's stolen cloak, 3 days of road dirt over a face no one had seen this close in years, and a cold in my hands that had lived there so long I had stopped calling it cold. I had ridden home in secret because I no longer trusted the letters that reached me at the front. Tithes from the north had thinned to nothing. A lord I had trusted with my life, Bevan of Vale, was dead of treason, hanged on a warrant sealed, they told me, with my own hand, while I was a month's ride away with an arrow in my shoulder and no memory of ever signing such a thing. A king who cannot trust his own seal has already lost his kingdom, and only the walls have not fallen yet. So I had come to see with my own eyes who in Kelmer was still loyal, and who had grown fat on the rot. And the first thing my own kingdom taught me was that a man in a poor cloak is a ghost. Emric was somewhere behind me in the dark, holding the horses. The one man alive who knew the beggar at the gate was the Alpha King. We had agreed I would go in alone. A king learns nothing traveling with a guard. Men only ever show you the face they keep for kings. I went up the low gate steps into the huddle of the city's cast-off, the ones with no hearth of their own, who slept in the lee of the wall where the guard did not trouble to move them. 20, 30 figures banked against the stone like snow drifted into a corner. A fire guttered low in an iron basket, and around it the warmth was rationed by unspoken law. Closest to the coals sat those with something to trade, and the rest of us leaned into whatever heat leaked past their shoulders. I found a gap of wall and sat. My wolf paced under my skin, uneasy in a way I could not name, not the war readiness I knew, something older, a pull like a compass finding a pole it had never been shown. I put it down to hunger and the strangeness of being no one. That was when I saw her. She sat apart from even the cast-off, which is a thing I would not have believed possible, that there is a rank below the lowest, a place the discarded keep for the ones they have agreed to discard further. She had made herself a nest of a torn grain sack and a cloak worn to the weave, and she sat with her knees drawn up and her back very straight, the way a person sits who has decided that if the world will take everything else, it will not take the way she holds her spine. Her face in the firelight was thin and grave and young, and there was a mark on the back of her right hand that I took at first for dirt and then saw was ink. A brand mark done in dye, not iron, a small crude wolf's head crossed through with a line. The city's way of writing shame where everyone could read it. A man near the fire laughed at something and jerked his chin at her. "Move along, traitor's whelp," he said without heat, the way you chew a dog off a warm stone. "Your kind spoils the smoke." She did not move along. She did not answer either. She only turned her face a degree away, and the fire caught the line of her jaw, and my wolf, I have no better word for what happened, my wolf spoke. It was not a howl and not a stillness. It was a name. A name rose in me the way the smell of rain rises before you see the cloud. A name I had never been taught and could not have known, and it belonged to her the way my own belonged to me. And I sat there in the snow with a stranger's name ringing in my blood and understood, coldly and completely, that whatever I had ridden home to find, I had found the wrong thing first, and it had found me. I have been a king a long time. I did not move. I have learned that the first rule of power is that the important thing must never show on your face. But I watched her. And after a while, when the fire had sunk low and the man who had shooed her was snoring and the cold came down off the passes like a hand pressing on the whole city, I watched her do the thing that undid me. She had bread. a heel of it dark and mean, the kind the mills sell as pig feed and the poor eat as supper. It was, I would learn, the whole of what she had. And when the smallest of the cast-off, a woman older than the wall itself, wrapped in rags, coughing the wet cough that carries people off before the thaw, when that old woman's coughing turned to something that frightened the whole huddle into silence, the girl with the branded hand crossed the frozen space no one else would cross, and knelt, and broke her bread, and gave the larger half away. She did it without ceremony. She did it the way you breathe. And then she took her own thin cloak, the one thing between her and the passes, and she settled it over the old woman's shoulders and tucked it at the throat, and went back to her cold corner with nothing, and sat up straight again, and waited out the night. I have watched men trade their honor for a warm room. I have watched a lord I raised with my own hands sell a garrison for a mine. I sat at the low gate of my own city, and watched a girl the whole world had agreed to call traitor give away her last warmth to a stranger who could do nothing for her, and I thought, there, that is the thing I rode a month to find. That is the loyalty I could not buy with a crown, and it is sitting in the one corner of my kingdom that spits on it. I rose and crossed to her. She watched me come the way a person watches, whether no fear, no hope, only the flat attention of someone who has learned that things arrive and there is no use flinching. I sat, an arm's length off, not close enough to crowd her. "You gave away your bread," I said. She needed it more. Her voice was low and even. Up close her eyes were gray, the pale gray of ice over deep water, and tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "And your cloak? You've been counting." A ghost of something at the corner of her mouth, not a smile, the memory of where one used to live. "Are you the sort that counts what other people give away, stranger?" "I'm the sort that noticed no one else did." She looked at me properly then, and I felt her take my measure, the road dirt, the two fine boots I had not thought to muddy well enough, the way I sat. I saw her file the boots away as a question and decide not to ask it. That, too, told me something about her. "There's no reason to sit with me," she said, not unkindly. "The marks dye not iron, but it may as well be iron for all it comes off. Sit here and it rubs onto you. Go closer to the fire. They'll let you if you don't say a soft word to the traitor's daughter." "I'm cold everywhere," I said. "I'll take the corner that shares." Something moved in her face, surprise, quickly folded away. She shifted a hand's width, which at the low gate is a coronation, and we sat together in the little heat two bodies make against a wall, and did not speak for a long time, and it was the first hour in longer than I could remember that the cold in my hands began, very slightly, to ease. Her name was Elena. She gave it to me near dawn, when the fire was ash and the snow had stopped, and the sky over the passes had gone the gray of her eyes, and she gave it plainly, without the flinch most people put around a name that has been used to hurt them. "Elena of Vale," she said, "though there's no Vale to be of any more, and no one calls me anything but the Mark. Vale, I did not let it land on my face. Bevan of Vale, hanged for treason on a warrant sealed with my hand while I lay fevered at the front. This was his daughter. The whole rotten thread I had come home to pull ran straight through the frozen corner where I had chosen, by chance or by the wolf's compass, to sit. They took Vale," she said, watching the gray light, "and not me, the winter my father died. The steward's men rode north with the king's writ, and the holdfast was crown property by spring forfeit, they said, treason's price. My father's silver mines feed the treasury now, or feed the steward. I've never been sure the two are different." She said it without bitterness, which was worse than bitterness. Bitterness is heat. This was the flat cold of a truth carried. So long it has stopped being an argument and become simply the shape of the world. "You believe he was innocent," I said. For the first time she looked at me with something like fire. "I don't believe it, I know it. My father would have walked into the passes barefoot before he'd have raised a hand against the king. He loved the king like a..." She stopped, steadied. "It doesn't matter what I know. Knowing a thing changes nothing when the ones who wrote the lie also hold the pen and the rope. I learned that at 15, watching them read the charge. I've had 4 years to make my peace with it. Have you made it? She was quiet a moment. No, she said, but I've stopped letting it show. That's close enough for the low gate. I could have told her then. The name was in my blood. The truth was in my hands. I could have thrown back the hood and watched the whole thing turn. And every hard-won instinct I owned told me not to, not because I doubted her, but because I did not yet know how deep the rot ran. And a king who reveals himself before he knows who holds the ropes is a king, handing his enemies the day and time of his own murder. If Casimir could forge my seal onto a death warrant, Casimir could forge my seal onto anything. I needed to see the paper. I needed to find the hand that had held the pen. And I needed, though I did not yet let myself name it, to be near her one more hour, and then one more. Where do you go in the day? I asked. The tannery when they'll have me. The mark keeps most work away, but the tannery doesn't care whose hands stir the pits so long as they stir. And you, stranger, that folded almost smile again. Where does a man with fine boots and a beggar's cloak go in the day? To learn who's loyal in this city, I said, which was true, and which she took for a beggar's grim joke, and I let her. I stayed 3 days of beggar in my own capital, and Elena, without ever meaning to, taught me my kingdom. She taught me it by the map of who was kind to her and who was not. That first gray morning she led me to the tannery, and on the way I watched the city read the mark on her hand and answer it. The baker's wife who set a spoiled loaf on the sill where the branded could take it without either of them having to speak. The 2 clerks who stepped wide of her as though shame were a puddle. The old spear sergeant at the market gate who, when a fishwife spat at Elena's feet, said quietly, "That's enough, Hilda," and got a look for it, and did not care. I learned in 3 mornings more of who was rotten, and who was sound in Kelmer than in 3 years of couriered reports. Because a man will lie to his king's letter, and tell the truth to a scorned girl in the street, without ever knowing he's being read. And I learned the shape of the theft. Elena did not know she was giving it to me. She spoke of Vale the way people speak of a dead parent in fragments without meaning to build a case. But I have sat in judgment half my life, and I built one. Her father's mines had run silver. The forfeiture had made that silver crown property. But the crown's treasury, I knew from the front, had grown leaner each year, not fatter. While I fought, I had gone without pay for my northern levies 2 seasons running. If Vale's silver was feeding the crown was a sieve. Somewhere between the mine and the treasury, the river ran into a private field. And the man who had sworn out the warrant, who had ridden north with the writ, who had held the pen while I lay fevered, the same man who now, 3 days' ride from where his king sat in the snow eating a beggar's bread, ruled Kelmer in the king's long absence with the king's own seal at his belt. Casimir, high steward of Kelmer. I had left him my seal ring for the ordinary business of the realm when I rode to war, the way a king does, the way a king must, because a kingdom cannot stop while its king bleeds at a pass. I had trusted him because my father had trusted his father. I had learned, at the low gate from a girl who had never once said his name to me, exactly what that trust had bought. On the 3rd night the cold broke into a real storm, the kind that kills, and the guard for once relented and let the low gate huddle crowd into the empty grain store below the wall. In the dark of it, packed with the city's discarded, Elena and I sat with our backs to a pillar and talked in the low voices you use when the whole world is asleep an arm's length away. "You never say why you came here," she said. "A man doesn't cross the winter passes to eat pig bread and count the kindness of beggars." "I came to find something I lost," I said. "A thing I was told was gone. I've found it isn't. And now I have to decide what to do about the men who told me it was gone." She was quiet. Then carefully, "The way you touch a wound to learn how deep it goes. You talk like a lord who's been robbed." "I talk like a man who was robbed," I said, "and has just this week understood by how much." She turned her head. In the near dark I could just see the gray of her eyes. "Whoever you are," she said slowly, "you're not what you're dressed as. I knew it the first hour, the boots. The way the others move around you without knowing why, even here, even filthy, you carry a room. My father carried a room like that." Her voice caught just slightly on father and steadied. "I don't need to know who you are, but if you're going after men who wrote a lie and made it law," she stopped. Started again, and now there was something in her voice I had not heard from her, a thread of the fire she kept banked. "If you ever get close enough to one of those men to make him tell the truth, stranger, make him tell it about Vale. Make him say my father's name and then say what he did to it. I'll never get closer than a lie's length to those men. But you might. You carry a room. Men like that are afraid of men like you, and they don't know why." "And if I did," I said, "if I made such a man say your father's name and the truth after it, in front of the whole city, what would you want at the end of it?" She thought about it seriously, as though it were a real question and not a beggar's dream in a grain store. "Nothing for me," she said at last. "The marks die, it'll wear. I've made my peace with the corner, but my father, I want them to cut his name back into the roll." She saw I didn't understand. "The roll of honor, in the high hall. Every lord loyal to the crown is cut into the stone of it, going back 300 years. When they took Vale, they had his name chiseled out. There's a scar in the stone where it was. I saw it once before they turned me from the hall. A blank scar where 300 years of loyalty used to have his name." Her hand, the branded one, had closed into a fist without her seeming to notice. "That's all I'd want. Not vengeance. Not the mines back. Just his name cut back into the stone where it belongs, so that when I'm gone too, someone who reads the roll will know he was loyal. That's the whole of it. Everything else they can keep." I sat in the dark of my own grain store with the daughter of a man my seal had murdered, and I made a decision that a wiser king might have made more carefully. I decided that Casimir would give her that. Not a pardon dressed as mercy, a reckoning, in daylight in the high hall, before the whole court that had spat on her, with the forgery broken open so that no man could ever call it doubt, and her father's name cut back into the stone. And I decided it not as a king weighing policy, but as a man who had watched her give away her bread. And it frightened me a little, how completely I had decided it, and how little the crown had to do with it. "Elena," I said, "whatever happens to me in the next days, and something is going to happen, I need you to promise me one thing. I don't make promises to men who won't give their names." "Then I'll trade you, my name for your promise." She went still. Around us the storm shook the grain store's shutters, and 30 sleepers breathed. "When you're sent for," I said, "and you will be, go, don't run from it. Don't think it's a trap. Walk into the high hall with your spine as straight as you're sitting now, and don't lower your eyes to any man in that room, because there won't be a man in that room with the right to make you." I let a breath go. "That's the promise." "That's a strange promise for a beggar to ask." "I'm a strange beggar." She almost laughed, the first whole thing close to a laugh I'd heard from her, and it changed her face so completely that my wolf turned over again, and the name rang in me again, Elena, Elena, as though it had never stopped. "All right," she said. "I promise. Now your name." And because I could not tell her the whole of it yet, not there, not with 30 ears in the dark and Casimir's men 3 streets away, I told her the true half. "Alaric," I said, "my given name. The name no one had called me since I was a boy small enough to have one, before I became only the king. My name is Alaric." She said it back once quietly, trying the shape of it. "Alaric," and in her mouth it was not a king's name at all. It was just a man's. And I understood that I had spent so long being only the crown that I had half forgot there was a man under it, until a scorned girl in a grain store said his name as though he were an ordinary person she had decided, against all evidence, to trust. I left before the dawn bell, while she slept sitting up with her straight spine finally bowed a little toward the pillar. I stood over her a moment in the gray. Then I went out into the last of the storm and found Emric where he had waited 3 days with the horses and a face like a thundercloud, and I said, "We're done being beggars. Ride for the North Road and bring me the men I named." And Emric, I need the warrant, the original. Bevan of Vale's death warrant, the sealed original out of the steward's own strong room. Tonight. Emric, who had followed me through worse, looked at me a long moment. And the girl, he said, because he had watched from the shadows 3 days of the king sitting at the low gate. The girl, I said, is the reason the North stopped paying its tithes and no one told me why. Get me the warrant. Getting the warrant is a story of its own, and not mine to tell here. It belongs to Emric, and to a strong room clerk who had watched his steward grow rich and had been waiting, without knowing it, for someone to ask him a true question. What matters is that on the 4th night I sat in a cold room in the loyal quarter, with the original death warrant of Bevan of Vale spread on the table before me, and I read my own murder of a loyal man written in another hand. It was a good forgery. I will give Casimir that. The clerk's copy hand had my phrasings, my brevities, the little ticks of a man who signs 100 documents a day. But a forger who copies your hand for 3 years learns your hand at its ordinary speed, and the warrant of Vale had been written slower. You could see it. If you had signed as many things as I had, in the too even pressure, the letters formed rather than run. No man signs his oldest friend's death sentence at his ordinary speed. And the seal was mine, genuinely mine, pressed from my own ring because Casimir had held my ring. But the wax under it had a hair caught in it, a long dark hair, and I had worn my hair short and graying for a decade, and Casimir's clerk, I would learn, had hair to his waist. Small things. A king's whole justice sometimes turns on small things, a hair in the wax, a heel of bread, the way a girl holds her spine. I gathered the small things, and the clerk who had waited 3 years to be asked, and the men Emric brought down from the north who had seen the steward's private silver trains ride out of Vale by moonlight, and I sent at last for the court. I sent for the court, and I sent, separately, quietly, for one gate drudge with a dye mark on her hand. And I dressed, for the first time in a month, as the king. The high hall of Kelmer had not seen me in a year and did not, for one strange breath, know what to do with me. I came in by the small door behind the throne, in the black and the gray I wear, the wolf cloak on my shoulders, and the herald staff struck the stone, and my name went out into the hall, Alaric Alpha, King of Kelmer, Lord of the Passes, and I watched the whole court turn like a field of grain in a wind. And I watched, in the front of them, Lord Casimir's face go through 3 things very fast. Joy, because the king had come home. Calculation, because the king had come home unannounced. And last, buried almost before it surfaced, fear, because a king who comes home in secret has been somewhere secret, seeing secret things. He mastered it beautifully. He was on one knee before I reached the dais, his voice warm as a hearth. My king, Kelmer has been a body without its head. We had no words. You were, had we known, we would have. You would have known exactly when I meant you to, I said, and took the throne, and let the hall settle into its ranks, and looked out over the court that ran my kingdom, the loyal and the bought and the ones who had never had to choose because no one had ever put a true choice in front of them. I've been 3 days in my own city, I said, and I've learned more of it than 3 years of your letters taught me. Steward, send for the last guest. She's at the small door. Casimir's brow moved a flicker. Guest, my king. You'll know her by her hand, I said. They brought her in. Elena of Vale, in the same worn cloak with the dye mark on her hand, walked the length of the high hall of Kelmer between rows of the people who had cast her down, and she did exactly what I had asked of her in the dark of the grain store. She walked with her spine straight, and she lowered her eyes to no one. There was a sound in the hall like a held breath. The trader's daughter, in the king's presence, brought to answer for something. I saw a lady near the front draw her skirts aside. I saw Casimir's face do a small, careful thing that told me he had already begun to build the story he would tell. Elena reached the foot of the dais and looked up and saw me on the throne, and I watched her understand. I will carry the memory of that a long time, not shock, though there was shock. It was the way her whole self reorganized around a single fact in the space of a breath, Alaric, the beggar, the king. And then, fast behind it, 3 days of the low gate rearied in a new light, and I saw her wonder, for one terrible instant, whether the man she had shared her fire with had been a lie the whole while, whether kindness given to a king was a thing that could be turned into a weapon against her. I saw her prepare in that instant to have been made a fool of. 4 years at the low gate had taught her that the world takes even your kindness and files it under evidence. "Elena of Vale," I said, and I said it gently, and I said it so the whole hall heard the of Vale, the name they had chiseled out of the stone. "I owe you a debt, and I mean to pay it in front of everyone who will spend the rest of their lives remembering that they watched. Will you hear it?" She found her voice. "You never said," she said, low only for me, though the hall strained to catch it. You sat there and let me. "I let you show me the truth," I said, "because if I'd shown you my face, you'd have shown me the face people keep for kings, and I'd never have learned a thing. Everyone in this hall lies to my crown, Elena. You fed a beggar you owed nothing. That's why you're standing where you're standing and they're sitting where they're sitting." I rose from the throne. A king does not rise for a gate drudge. The hall knew it. I did it anyway and let them make of it what they would. "Now hear your debt paid." I turned to the court, and I stopped being, for a while, the man from the grain store, and became the thing they had built me to be. 4 years ago, I said, while I lay fevered at the Sarn Pass with an arrow through my shoulder and no strength to hold a pen, a warrant was sworn out in this hall condemning Lord Bevan of Vale for treason against my crown. It bore my seal. He was hanged on it. His holdfast and his silver were forfeit to the crown. His daughter was branded and cast to the low gate, where she has slept these 4 winters, and where 3 nights ago she gave away the last bread she had to a coughing old woman she owed nothing, while the people of this hall stepped around her as though loyalty were a thing you could catch. I let that sit. "I have read that warrant, steward. I read it the night before last, in the loyal quarter, with a clerk of your own strong room reading it beside me." Casimir did not move. He was very good. "My king, the warrant is troubling to read. I don't doubt treason always is, but it was sworn in law, sealed with your own." "It was sealed with my ring," I said, "which you held because I gave it to you to run my kingdom while I bled for it. The seal is mine, the hand is not." I drew the warrant from my cloak and held it up so the wax caught the hall's candlelight. "There is a hair in this wax, a long dark hair. I have worn my hair short and gray for 10 years. Silence. "Your copy clerk, steward, the one who wrote my letters when you were too busy stealing my north to write your own, wears his hair to his waist. Shall I send for him? He's already told me a great deal. He's told me about the silver trains that ride out of Vale by moonlight and never reach my treasury. He's told me whose strong room they reach instead. He's been waiting 4 years for a king to come home and ask him a true question. It seems I was the last man in Kelmer to learn what the low gate already knew. The hall had gone the particular kind of quiet that is not silence, but the sound of a great many people rapidly recalculating whom they had ever agreed with. Casimir's warmth was gone. What was under it was not the villain's snarl of a story, but something worse and more common. The blank, working stillness of a man rifling through every possible lie and finding, one after another, that the king already held the true version of it. He had built his fortune on the certainty that I would never come home a beggar. He had not planned for a king who would sit at his own gate and be shown the truth by the very woman he had thrown away. "I raised no hand against Kelmer," Casimir said at last, and it came out thin. "Whatever a bought clerk." "You raised a hand against Kelmer the day you decided a loyal man was worth less than his mine," I said, and there was no gentleness in me now at all. My wolf was in my voice, and the hall felt it, and Casimir felt it, and I watched the thing he had spent 3 years building come apart behind his eyes. "You murdered my friend with my own name. You made me his killer while I lay bleeding for the same crown he loved. And you branded his daughter and put her out in the snow so that if the truth ever walked into this hall, it would walk in wearing a mark that told everyone not to believe it. I let the warrant fall to the day a stone between us. Loyal Kelmer, hear me. Lord Bevan of Vale was innocent. He was loyal to his last breath, and he was murdered by the man who has ruled you in my name. Take the steward. He'll answer for all of it in law this time, real law, the kind that doesn't run at the too even speed of a forger's pen. My guard took him. He did not fight. There is no fighting a hall that has decided, in a single breath, that it was always on the other side. They took him out through the great doors, and the court parted for him the way the low gate parts for the branded, and I did not watch him go. I had already turned back to Elena. She was standing exactly where I had left her, at the foot of the dais, spine straight, eyes on me, not lowered as I'd asked, though the whole world had just tilted under her. There were tears on her face, but she was not weeping the way the broken weep. She was weeping the way people weep when a weight they have carried so long they forgot its shape is finally, suddenly, gone, and the body doesn't know yet what to do with being upright. There is one more thing, I said, to her and to the hall both. Stewards' crimes are laws to punish, but a name is the king's to restore. I looked to the far wall of the high hall, where the roll of honor runs in cut stone 300 years deep, every lord loyal to Kelmer named in it, and where, 4 years gone, there was a blank scar chiseled into the record where a loyal man's name had been. Master of the stone, I said, and the old craftsman who keeps the roll came forward, trembling, chisel already in his hand because he had guessed. Cut Bevan a veil back into the roll. Cut it deeper than any name on that wall, and beneath it cut this in words, so that everyone who reads the roll for the next 300 years reads it, loyal to his king and wronged by his king's name, and restored when the king came home. Let it stand as a mark against me as much as for him, so that no king after me forgets what a borrowed seal can do. The chisel bit stone. It is a small sound, a chisel on stone, but the whole hall listened to it as though it were a bell, and Elena listened to it with her branded hand pressed to her mouth, and I came down off the dais. A king does not come down off the dais. I have done many things this year that a king does not do, and I stood in front of her, close, the way we had sat at the low gate. You asked me in the grain store, I said, low, only for her now, what you'd want if I ever got close enough to make such a man tell the truth. You said, nothing for yourself, just his name in the stone. The chisel rang behind us. It's being cut, so now I get to ask what you never let yourself ask for. And you have to answer honestly, Elena, because I'll know if you don't. I sat next to you 3 nights, and I know your honest voice from your low gate voice. A breath. What do you want for yourself? She looked at me a long time. The tears had stopped. What was in her face now was harder and truer than gratitude. She was weighing me, the way she'd weighed me the first hour by my boots, the way you weigh a person you are deciding whether to trust with the last thing you have. I want to know, she said quietly, whether the man at the low gate was real, whether Alaric was real, or whether he was a king wearing a beggar to catch a steward, and I was just the bait that walked in nicely. It was the fairest question anyone had ever asked me, and it deserved the whole truth. The steward I'd have caught without you, I said. The clerk, the warrant, the silver trains, that was law, and law would have got him in the end whether or not I ever sat at a gate. You didn't catch him. I let her hear it land. What you caught, Elena, was me. The man at the low gate was more real than the king has let himself be in 20 years. I came home to find who in Kelmer was still loyal, and I found a whole city full of people loyal to my crown and afraid of my letters, and one branded girl in the last cold corner of it who was loyal to nothing but the plain fact that a coughing woman needed bread more than she did. And I stopped. There is no way to say my wolf knew your name before I did to a woman who does not yet know she is a king's fated mate, without asking her to carry more than a person can carry in 1 hour. So I said the human half, which was also true. And something in me, that I'd stopped listening to years ago, sat down next to you and would not get up. That was real. It's the realest thing I've brought home from this war. She was quiet, the chisel rang. Somewhere in the stone, a wronged name was coming back. I'm the traitor's daughter, she said. I've a dye mark on my hand and 4 winters of the low gate in me, and a father the whole realm watched hang. Whatever you think you found in the cold, king, I don't come clean. I come with all of that. The marks dye, I said, it'll wear. You told me so yourself. And then I did the thing I had wanted to do since the grain store. I took her branded hand in both of mine that had been cold for years, that had begun to warm the first hour I sat beside her, and I turned it over so the dye wolf faced the light, and I said, so the hall heard it. This hand fed a beggar it owed nothing, in a kingdom that owed it everything. There is no cleaner thing in all of Kelmer. I'd sooner have this hand at my side than every unmarked hand in this hall, and they know it, and that's why they're so quiet. I closed her fingers gently and let her hand go, because it had to be hers to give, not mine to take. I'm not going to claim you in front of them like a prize, Elena. You've been a thing other people decided the fate of for 4 years, and I won't be one more. So I'll say it plainly as a man, and you'll answer as you like. And if the answer's no, you'll leave here Lady of Vale restored with your father's name in the stone, and every door in Kelmer open to you and me the poorer for it, but not one word of pressure on you. I swear it on the wolf. I drew a breath that shook more than a king's breath should. Stay, not as the trader's daughter cleared, as Elena. Stay and let me spend the rest of a long reign proving that the man at the low gate was the true one. That's the whole of it. Everything else the realm can keep. I had given her back her own words, and I watched her hear them. She did not answer quickly. She was not a woman who answered quickly. I had loved that about her before I let myself use the word. She looked past me at the wall where the chisel was cutting her father back into 300 years of loyalty. She looked at the court that had spat at her feet, silent now, and at the throne she had walked past to reach me, and at the small door she had come in by. And then she looked back at me, and the fire she kept banked came all the way up into her gray eyes at last, and it was not the fire of vindication. It was something warmer and more dangerous and entirely her own. At the low gate, she said, you took the corner that shares. When you could have gone to the fire, you sat in the cold with the one person who had nothing, and you shared it. Her voice was steady now, straight-spined as the rest of her. I've spent 4 years learning who a person is by how they treat the one with nothing to give, and I know exactly who you are, Alaric. I knew before the herald said the rest of it. The ghost of the almost smile, and then the whole of it, the real one, the one that changed her face. Yes, she said, I'll stay, not because you're the king. Because you're the man who sat in the cold. The chisel stopped, the name was cut. And in the high hall of Kelmer the whole court, loyal and bought and undecided alike, watched their king take a scorned girl's hand from the low gate, took it as she offered it, not before, and there was no bowing then, and no bond made visible for them to gape at, only 2 people standing very close at the foot of a dais, and it was more than enough. The bowing came later, and lasted years, and she bore it with the same straight spine she'd kept when they spat, and never once let it go to her head, because a woman who has slept in the last cold corner of a kingdom does not forget the corner, and made me not forget it either. We did not tear down the low gate. Elena would not have it. Instead she had the wall there cut, too, not with a lord's name, but with plain words, low enough that a person sitting against the stone in the cold could read them at eye height. Here the Queen of Kelmer slept 4 winters, and was shown kindness by no one, and learned it anyway. Below it she had them set an iron basket that is never let go cold, and bread that the branded and the beggared can take without asking, and no guard is permitted to move a soul who shelters there. It is the only monument in the kingdom she ever asked for. She visits it more than she visits the throne. I am king of Kelmer. I have held the passes, and I will hold them again. But if you want to know the truest thing I ever did with the crown, it is not a battle and not a law. It is that I once sat down cold and nameless in the worst corner of my own city, and a girl the whole realm had agreed to throw away moved a hand's width to share her fire with a stranger. And I had the sense, at last, to stay in the cold beside her, and never, from that hour to this one, to get up. The hall emptied the way, a wound drained slowly, and with people you had not known were poisoning you, leaving with the rest. I stood at the foot of the dais with Elena's hand no longer in mine, because she had taken it back the moment the court's eyes were on us, not from doubt, but from a lifetime of learning that a scorned woman touched by power becomes a target twice over. She had won nothing yet that the room could not take back. A name in the stone is a name in the stone. The living court that had chiseled it out once could learn to look past it again. I knew that. She knew it better. Emric found me before the last lord had bowed his way out. He did not bow. He never has. He put his mouth near my ear and said the 4 words that turned my triumph to ash in my throat. The silver went further. I had been so pleased with my hair and the wax, my clerk, my broken forgery, that I had let myself believe the theft ended in Casimir's strong room. But a man does not forge his king's hand to murder a loyal lord for the pleasure of watching silver sit in his own cellar. He does it because someone else wants the silver, and someone else is paying, and someone else is protected. Casimir was a hand. I had cut off a hand and called it a killing. Where, I said. North, past the Reeve. Emric's face was the face of a man who has followed a trail and hated where it led. The trains ride out of Vale by moon, but they don't stop at Casimir's hold. They water there and ride on up the pass to Lord Voss. Voss of the Reeve, the lord who these 2 years past had written me letter after courteous letter at the front. The treasury is thin, my king. The North cannot bear another season's levy. There is a way to steady Kelmer's debt, my king, a marriage, a foreign crown, a princess of the Iron Court whose dowry would fill every empty coffer. I had read those letters in the mud at Sarnpass and thought them the honest counsel of a worried lord. I understood now, standing in my own emptying hall with a chill that had nothing to do with the passes, exactly what they had been. Voss had emptied my treasury with one hand through Casimir, through Vale's stolen silver, and with the other hand offered me the cure. Sell myself to a foreign crown to fill the hole he had dug, and be bound, and be married far away from any home-born mate, and never come home a beggar to find out how. The debt was manufactured. The marriage was the point. And a king wed to the Iron Court is a king who owes the Iron Court, and a lord who arranged it holds them both. He'll have heard by tomorrow that Casimir's taken, I said. By the day after he'll understand the king came home in secret and saw too much. Emric glanced just once at Elena where she stood apart, straight-spined, watching the 2 of us with those gray eyes that missed nothing. And he'll understand something else, my king, a living forger who can name him, a restored Vale line that unravels where his silver came from, and a girl from Vale standing at your side who grew up over the very mines he's bleeding. Emric's voice dropped further. Voss doesn't need to win a war. He needs 3 people dead before the trial, your clerk, and the lady, and, if he's bold, you. Silence the tongue, discredit the blood, and marry the widowed crown off to his princess anyway. He's a patient man. But he's just been made very fast. I have stood in a lot of cold rooms understanding that men wanted me dead. It is a strange thing about the crown. You grow used to being hunted. What I was not used to, what went through me like the passwind through a torn cloak, was the picture of Elena, who had given away her last bread, dead in the snow to protect a lie about silver. Double the clerk's guard tonight, I said. Loyal men, Emric, men you've bled beside no one Casimir ever paid, no one who set foot in the Reeve. And the lady. I'll not be guarded like a jewel in a box, said Elena. She had crossed the hall without my hearing her, which is a thing very few people manage. My wolf hears everyone. But it had never once startled at her, from the first hour at the low gate. She moved inside my guard the way weather moves, and I had stopped being able to tell where my watchfulness ended and my wanting her near began. You heard all that, I said. I hear most things. 4 years at a gate teaches you to. She looked from me to Emric and back, and there was no fear in her, only that banked, careful fire. A lord called Voss holds my father's silver and wants me dead before I can say so out loud. Have I the shape of it? You have the shape of it. Then don't put me in a box, Alaric. She said my name low. The court was gone, and she gave it to me the way she had in the grain store, the man's name, not the king's. I've been a thing kept in a corner for 4 winters. I'll not spend my first free week kept in a finer one. Guard the clerk, he's the tongue, he matters. Me you can't hide anyway, the whole city watch me walk this hall. Hiding me only tells Voss I'm worth the killing. The fire came up a degree. Let me be seen. Let me be so seen, so quickly, so useful that killing me stops being clever and starts being the thing that hangs him. A dead traitor's daughter is a shrug. A dead Luna of Kelmer is a war. Make me the second before he can arrange the first. Emmerich looked at her a long moment. Then he looked at me, and something in his weathered face had shifted. The look of a man revising an opinion he'd held since I first sat at the low gate. My king, he said slowly, I've followed you into 3 winters I didn't expect to leave. I'll say this once and never again where the court can hear it. He tipped his head at Elena. That one thinks like a campaign. If you don't marry her mind, because I'd rather have it on our side of the map than his. I did not tell either of them then that my wolf had known her name before I did, or what that meant, or why I had gone still to the marrow of my bones every time she moved past me. There was a reckoning to survive first. But I remember thinking in that emptying hall that Voss had made one error already, larger than any ledger. He had tried to have this woman killed as a nobody 4 years too early, and instead she had learned in the corner he'd thrown her into exactly how to be impossible to kill. They came for the clerk that same night. Perrin, that was his name, the long-haired copy clerk who had forged my hand onto Bevan of Vale's death, was not a brave man, and I did not need him to be. He had spent 4 years writing his master's lies with a sick heart, and when Emmerich's questions had finally given him a door out of it, he had walked through weeping. I did not love him. He had held the pen. But a king who wants true justice does not get to choose that his witnesses be lovable, and Perrin's crooked, guilty testimony, given in daylight with the hair and the wax to back it, would hang Voss as surely as Casimir. So I kept him alive, and Voss tried to make sure I could not. They came over the roof of the loyal quarter, 3 of them, quiet as men who have killed for coin before. What they had not counted on was that the room they entered no longer held a frightened clerk, but 4 of Emmerich's northern spears lying in the dark waiting for exactly this, and Perrin himself moved to a cellar 2 streets off with a candle and a chamber pot, and a guard he could not see. 2 of the killers died on the spears. The 3rd Emmerich took alive, a hard, close, ugly business in the dark that I will not pretend was clean. And by the gray of morning that 3rd man had told us, in the flat, exhausted way of a man who knows he is finished, that he'd been paid in Reeve silver by a Reeve steward to make sure the king's forger never reached the king's court. Reeve silver, Voss's own coin, stamped from Voss's own hand, in the purse of a man sent to murder my only witness. I laid the coins out on the table beside the forged warrant and the hair and the wax, and I thought, he is fast now and a frightened patient man is the most dangerous kind, because he stops being patient without learning to be careful. He'll not try the clerk again, Emmerich said. He'll know it's guarded now. He'll turn to the lady or to you, and he can't reach you easily. You've a war guard and a wolf's ears. He did not say the rest. He'll turn to Elena, I said. He did, but not with a knife. Voss was cleverer than that, and here is where I nearly lost her, not to steel, but to the oldest weapon a court owns. 3 days after the killers came over the roof, a story began to move through Kelmer the way rot moves through a stored apple, quietly from the inside, until suddenly the whole thing is soft. The story was this, that the traitor's daughter had bewitched the king, that she had not been found at the low gate by chance but had placed herself there, knowing the king rode home in secret. How else would a beggar girl end up beside him? That the whole tale of the forged warrant was a fiction she had spun to clear her treasonous blood and set herself over Kelmer. That the true traitor was, and remained, the house of Vale, and the king had been snared by a scheming girl into breaking a just sentence and shaming his own throne. It was well made. It used the very truth of our meeting, the impossible chance of it, as its poison. And it was moving fastest, Emmerich found, in exactly the quarters that took Reeve coin. I wanted to answer it with an edict. I wanted to stand in the high hall and command Kelmer to believe her. Elena would not let me. "You can't decree a court into loving me," she said. We were in the small solar off the hall, the one with the good hearth, where I had lodged her over her objections, not a box, I'd promised, only a door that locked from her side. She stood at the window with her back to me, watching the snow, her branded hand, the dye already fading to a bruise-gray ghost of the wolf's head flat against the cold glass. "You can order them silent. You can't order them to change what's in them. I've had a mark on my hand 4 years, Alaric. I know exactly how much a person believes the thing they've been told to believe about someone beneath them, and how little a king's word underneath it changes. If you command them to honor me, they'll bow to my face and whisper the story behind my back for 30 years, and my children will grow up hearing it, and the day you die it will come out into the open and take everything." She turned. "No. If they're going to honor me, they have to do it because they've seen who I am with their own eyes in a moment I didn't stage. The way you did at the gate. You didn't decree yourself into trusting me. You watched me give away my bread." A hard, wry ghost of the smile. "So let me be watched. Stop guarding the door so well. Let Kelmer see me. It's the only thing that's ever cleared a mark that's stuck, and it doesn't clear it fast, and it doesn't clear it kindly, but it's the only thing that clears it true." So I did the hardest thing I had done since I sat cold at my own gate. I let her walk out into a city that half believed she had bewitched me, unguarded except for the 2 spears she'd allow, and I did not follow, and I watched Kelmer decide. It decided slowly. It decided the way she'd said it would, not kindly. There were doors shut in her face those first weeks. There was a fishwife who spat, the same one perhaps from the market gate. There was a lady of the court, Lady Sorrel, wife to one of Voss's northern friends, who curtsied to Elena in the hall with a depth of mockery so exact it was almost art, and said, loud enough to carry, that it was a wonder how quickly the low gate learned court manners. One would almost think she'd been born to better and only pretending at rags. Which was the Reeve story, dressed as a compliment, sharpened to draw blood. And Elena, who had spent 4 winters learning to keep her spine straight while the world spat, did not rise to it. She curtsied back, exactly as deep, and said mild, clear, so the whole hall heard, "It's no wonder at all, my lady. I was born to veil, which is loyal, and I learned my manners from a father who was loyal, and I've kept them through 4 winters at a gate where loyalty bought me nothing. If that looks like pretending, I'm content to have you think me the finest pretender in Kelmer. Pretending's the only honest work a scorned woman's allowed." And she inclined her head and moved on, and left Lady Sorrel curtsied down to a point she could not gracefully rise from, and the hall, which loves nothing so much as watching one of its own outfenced, did a thing I had not heard it do about Elena before. It laughed, on her side. That was one moment. There were dozens over those weeks, and I could fill an hour telling them, but the one that turned the city was smaller and had no wit in it at all. There was fever in the low quarter that winter, the wet cough that carries off the poor before the thaw, the same cough that had taken the old woman's breath at the low gate the night Elena gave away her bread. The court did what courts do about fever in the low quarter, nothing and quietly, and with the windows shut. But Elena had slept 4 winters in that quarter's cold, and she knew the names of the people the fever was taking, and she did not ask my leave. She simply went. Into the sick rooms the court would not enter, with what medicines the king's coin could buy, and she sat with the dying poor of Kelmer the way she had sat with the coughing old woman, and she did it not as a Luna performing charity for the story of it, but as a woman going back to her own people. And the low quarter, which had every reason to resent the trader's daughter risen so high, watched her come down into the fever, and it knew her. You cannot fake that. The poor can smell a staged mercy at 50 paces. They have had a lifetime of practice. What they smelled on Elena was one of their own who had gotten warm and had come back down into the cold on purpose. And by the end of that fever winter, the low quarter of Kelmer would have marched into the passes barefoot for her. And the Reeves story died in the streets it had been born to poison. Because you cannot tell the poor that a woman bewitched the king when they have watched her hold their dying by the hand. I watched all of it, and I fell. There is no dignified word for a king to use, so I will use the true one. I fell the rest of the way, past wanting her near, past the wolf's compass, into the plain human bottom of it. And I understood that Emmerich had been right, and that I did not want her mind on my side of the map so much as I wanted her wholly for the rest of a long reign, and that I had wanted it since the grain store and only now had the honesty to say it to myself. And still I had not told her about the wolf, and the name, and what she was to me under the destiny of it. There had been no clean hour for it. And if I am honest, a king should be honest at least in his own account of things. I was afraid. Not that she'd refuse, that she'd hear fated mate and think it a leash. She had spent 4 years being told what she was by people who wanted to own her. I would not be one more voice telling Elena of Vale what she was destined to. If the bond wanted her, the bond could wait, and let her choose me as a man first freely, the way she'd chosen to share her fire, or not at all. The wolves decided they were done waiting for me. Kelmer keeps a pack, not the spirit wolves of story but real wolves, great gray beasts of the high passes, the king's pack, that have run beside the crown for 300 years and let no hand but the king's near them. They are half wild and wholly loyal, and they answer to no one else. A lord who reaches for them draws back a hand short of fingers. On the night I meant at last to have Elena named Luna before the court, a naming, not a claiming, so that the honor came to her by law and not by whisper. The pack came down into the high hall. They should not have. They come to the king's whistle and no other summons, and I had not whistled. But they came down the great stair into the naming with the whole court assembled, 12 gray wolves moving like water, and the court froze the way people freeze near things that could kill them, and I froze too, because I did not know what my own pack was doing loose in my hall. And the wolves crossed the whole length of it, past me, past the throne, past every lord of Kelmer, and they went to Elena, where she stood in the plain gray gown she'd chosen over any finery, and the great old lead bitch, who had let 3 men die for reaching toward her over the years, put her huge head against Elena's fading branded hand and leaned. And one by one the pack lay down in a ring around Elena of Vale, and put their heads on their paws, and looked at the court of Kelmer as if to ask what exactly anyone intended to do about it. The hall made a sound I have never heard a court make, not a gasp, not a cheer, a kind of long-held breath let go all at once, the sound of 200 or 300 people watching a thing they have been raised to believe is destiny happen in front of them, and knowing altogether that no whisper survives it, because everyone in Kelmer knows the king's pack answers no one else. And here was the pack, unwhistled, choosing the traitor's daughter over the whole assembled blood of the realm, and there is not a story in the world you can tell a court against the plain evidence of the wolves. Elena stood in the ring of them with her hand on the old bitch's head and looked across the hall at me, and I saw her understand that this was the thing I hadn't told her, and I saw her not be angry, thank the moon. I saw her only ask me, with her gray eyes across the whole silent hall, "Is this true, then?" And I came down off the dais, past the frozen court, into the ring of my own wolves who parted for me as they part for no other. And I stood in front of her, and told her the truth I had been holding since the low gate, quietly, but not so quietly that the front of the hall could not hear, because she had earned the right to have it said where the whisperers stood. "The first night," I said, "at the gate, before you gave away your bread, before I knew your name or your father's, before I knew anything but that you sat straight in the cold, my wolf spoke your name to me. I hadn't heard it. No one had told me. It rose in me the way your own name rises, and it belonged to you, and I have known since that first hour in the snow what the pack has just told the whole of Kelmer." I let a breath go, and it shook, because a king's breath does that exactly once in a life. You're my fated mate, Elena. The bond knew you before I did. I didn't tell you because you've spent 4 years being told what you are by people who wanted to own you, and I would sooner have died at that gate than be one more. So I want to say the whole of it plainly in front of them and let it be yours to answer. I did not kneel. I am the Alpha King and I will not perform. But I took her fading, branded hand in both of mine, the way I had at the reckoning, and I turned it palm up to the light. The bond wants you. That's destiny, and destiny is only half a thing. The other half is choosing. I'm not asking you to be my mate because the wolves lay down at your feet. I'm asking because you gave a coughing stranger your last bread, and went back down into the fever after you were warm, and outfenced Lady Sorrow without drawing blood, and thought like a campaign when a lord wanted you dead. The wolves chose the mate. I'm choosing you. Say no and you leave here Lady of Vale, honored, wolves and all, and free. Say yes and be Luna of Kelmer, and the bond gets what it wanted, but only because you did. She was quiet in the ring of wolves. The court did not breathe. The old lead bitch turned her great head and looked up at Elena, and Elena looked down at her, and then back at me, and the banked fire came all the way up, and this time it did not go down again. You held that, she said, since the gate. You sat cold at your own wall and knew I was that, and you sat in the cold anyway and let me choose you first. Her voice was not quite steady, and she let it not be in front of them, which was its own kind of courage. Do you know what 4 years at a gate teaches a woman about being chosen, Alaric? That it never happens, that you're the thing left over. That when someone finally looks at you, it's because they want something you're standing on. Her hand turned in mine and closed around my fingers, deliberate, hers. And then a king who could have any unmarked hand in the realm tells me the wolves knew me from the first, and in the same breath tells me it doesn't matter unless I say so. That's not being wanted for what I'm standing on. The whole smile now, the real one, the one that had undone me in the grain store. That's the first time in my life I've been chosen for what I am. Yes, in front of them so they hear it clear. Yes, not because the wolves lay down. Because the man sat in the cold. And because she is who she is, she lifted her chin at the silent, whisper-shamed court over my shoulder and added, mild as milk, and they can put that in their story. The hall broke. Not into a bow, Elena would come to hate the bowing and never quite let it be easy, but into the roar a court makes when it has been on the wrong side of a thing and wants very badly to be seen on the right side quickly. And in the roar the old lead bitch rose and put her forepaws on Elena's shoulders, gentle as a grandam, and Elena laughed. The first full laugh I'd heard from her, a sound like ice going off a river in spring. And I stood in the ring of my own 300-year pack with my fated mate's hand in mine, and thought that I had ridden home a beggar to catch a thief, and had instead been caught wholly, at my own gate, and would be glad of it every day of a long reign. We had a lord to hang yet. Destiny does not settle a ledger. Voss came to court himself in the end, which surprised Emric and did not surprise me. A patient man who has run out of quiet weapons does not flee. He walks in the front door wearing his loyalty like clean linen and dares you to prove the stain. He came down from the reeve with a fine retinue and a fine speech, grave with concern for the king who had suffered so under the wicked steward Casimir, and offered with the smoothest sorrow to help set the treasury right through. He was so sorry to raise it in such a time. The alliance he had long counseled, the foreign crown, the dowry that would cure Kelmer's poverty. He had killed a lord, emptied my coffers, sent men over a roof to murder my witness, and poisoned my city against my mate, and he stood in my high hall and offered to marry me out of the very hole he dug, and I will confess a cold admiration for the sheer flat nerve of it. I let him talk. I have learned that a guilty man, given enough rope and an audience, will always reach for a little more than he needs. And I had one thing Voss did not know I had. I had Elena, who had grown up over the mines of Vale. Voss made his error when he spoke gravely of how the treasury's true shortfall could only be met from abroad, since Kelmer's own silver, Vale's silver, now crowned silver, yielded so little, so tragically little, barely enough to keep the mines lit. He said it to close the door on any home-born cure, to make the foreign marriage the only key. And Elena, standing beside me in the gray gown with the wolves lying at the hall's edge, said into the grave hush in her mild low-gate voice, "That's a strange thing to know, my lord." Voss turned, "My lady. You said Vale yields barely enough to keep the mines lit." She did not raise her voice. She did not have to. The whole hall had learned by now to lean toward it. I grew up over those mines. My father kept the true tally in his own hand, not the tally he sent the crown, the true one, the count a mining lord keeps because silver walks if you don't count it twice. Vale yields 4 times what the crown books show. It always has. The gap between the true tally and the crown's books is the richest silver stream in the north, and it doesn't go to the mine's lamps, and it doesn't go to the treasury, because I've seen the treasury's books now and the treasury is starving. She tilted her head, mild, lethal. So I find it strange, my lord, that you know Vale yields little. The crown's false books say it yields little. Only a man reading the crown's false books would know to say it. A man reading the true silver, the silver that actually rides north by moonlight, would know Vale is the wealthiest hold in Kelmer, and would never in his life call it poor. She let that sit one breath. You've told us which book you read from, my lord. I wonder where you got it. I have watched men lose battles. I have never watched a man lose one faster than Voss lost his in that single mild sentence from a woman he had tried to have killed as a nobody. Because there is no answer to it. To know the false yield is to confess you keep the false books, and to keep the false books is to be the thief. And the whole hall did the arithmetic at the same instant Voss did, and I saw him understand that the traitor's daughter he'd thrown into the snow to be forgotten had grown up, in the very hold he was robbing, into the one person alive who could count. He did the thing frightened patient men do when the quiet weapons are gone. He reached for the loud one. His hand went to his belt, and his retinue's hands went to theirs, and for a heartbeat there was going to be blood in my high hall, and the pack of Kelmer, who had lain quiet at the edge through all his fine linen and his fine speech, came off the floor as one gray wave, because the king's wolves know a drawn blade near the king's mate the way they know the scent of the passwind, and Voss of the Reeve never cleared his sword before the old lead bitch's weight took him to the stone, jaws at his throat and not closing. Waiting, looking to Elena, not to me, for the word. And Elena, who had every right in the world to give it, stood over the man who had killed her father with a borrowed pen and put men over a roof to murder her, and did not give it. "Hold," she said to the wolf quiet, and the wolf held. "He answers in law," she said to me to the hall, straight-spined in her gray gown with a lord under her pack's teeth. "Real law, the kind that doesn't run at a forger's speed. My father didn't get that. Voss will. Let it be the difference between us and them, and let it be cut in the stone beside my father's name that the house of Vale, when it finally had the teeth at the throat, chose the law." She looked down at Voss, and there was no mercy in her face and no cruelty either, only the flat cold justice of a woman who has counted the true tally and will not be robbed even of her own vengeance's dignity. "Get up, my lord. You're going to trial. And the whole realm is going to hear exactly how rich Vale is, and exactly where the silver went, and exactly whose hand held the pen my father hanged on. You made me a nobody so the truth would wear a mark no one believed, and I grew up in your own stolen mines into the one person who could add. A ghost of the smile, cold as the passes. You should have counted me too. We hanged Voss of the Reeve in the spring in law, with Casimir beside him and Perrin's crooked testimony, and the hair and the wax and Elena's true tally all cut into the record. And the foreign alliance, the manufactured debt, the whole architecture of the theft came down. And the treasury, once the silver stopped riding north by moonlight, filled from Kelmer's own honest ground, and I never sold myself to a foreign crown to fill a hole a thief had dug. Vale came back to Elena, mines and hold and the true tally her father had kept, and she gave the running of it to the low-quarter folk who'd sat with her in the fever. And it yields, in honest daylight books, 4 times what Voss ever stole in the dark, and every coin of it is Kelmer's. The dye mark on her hand wore away that spring, as she'd always said it would. The wolf's head crossed with a line, faded to nothing, gone. She would not let me have a new mark put there, no ring cut, no crown's brand to replace the shame's. I've worn enough of other people's marks, she said, the morning it finally vanished, turning her clean hand in the light. I'll wear yours the only honest way because I chose it and you can't see it and it doesn't wash off. And she put that clean, unmarked hand against my chest, over the place where my wolf had first spoken her name in the snow, and left it there. And that is the only mate mark I have ever wanted or will.